Welcome, everyone. And thank you very much to our Female Funding Fair as part of the StartmeupHK Festival hosted by InvestHK. We're really proud to be hosting a core event, which is part of this week's activities, and it's really around working towards the UN SDG number 5 goal, gender equality. And that's really part of what the Start Me Up and InvestHK really working towards how we're supporting SDG goals during this week's event. So it's really great to see businesses focusing on that. So for those that don't know me, I'm Nicole Denholder, the founder of Next Chapter Raise, and we focus on supporting women led businesses to access capital. And this is why we've teamed up with InvestHK this week. We have a platform where female entrepreneurs go to understand and seek capital for their businesses. And we support female founders in understanding different types of capital and funding available, where to find it, how to access it, how to learn about it. And we run 2 programs to do this. We have our Savvy Club and our Capital Club. And the programs are designed to support women in revenue and business growth by looking at crowdfunding, grants, revenue-based financing, angel investment, and venture capital. So I want to thank you all for joining today. And before we start our roundtable, I'd really like to invite Angelica Lowe, who's the head of consumer products at InvestHK, to open our event. Thank you, Angelica.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nicole. So firstly, a big welcome. I see quite a lot of familiar faces here on the screen. Female Funding Fair, again, is one of our main events of this year's Start Me Up Festival. This year's theme is Welcome to a Future Unlimited. And I'd like to bring your attention to the subtitle of today's Female Funding Fair about raising the bar on gender equality. So as a fellow female, you know, the fact that we're having a female funding fair just kind of means that we're not quite there yet in terms of gender equality yet. And I think both investors and you know, now the companies know that there are very many unique differences that female founders are looking for. And I think it's great that we have these platforms for dialogue, for education, you know, to understand both from the investor side and also from the female funding team side about what needs to be done, you know, where are the gaps in knowledge and is there a gap in understanding as well. I think the important thing is also to look ahead because, you know, there's a nice Zen quote, you know, what's the sound of one hand clapping? I mean, it's an analogy of like it takes 2 to tango. But I like the Zen one. So I think entrepreneurs and you know, just having things like, you know, Female Funding Fair and the whole Start Me Up week it's so important to the ecosystem. And the whole week is a week-long event, and there's going to be a lot of different themes. And I encourage actually the audience to sign up for events that you wouldn't otherwise feel that are precisely related to you. It's actually a great opportunity to hear things beyond your normal scope of knowledge or interest. And one of them is actually our team is going to be hosting on May 27th at 9 p.m. Hong Kong time is actually the pet supplies business. And I know there's a lot of female founders also in the pet arena and the pet zone. So we're not talking about selling dogs or cats, but the whole pet supplies. And even though it's 9 o'clock at night, please register so you can watch the video recording as well. So for those who don't know Invest Hong Kong, we offer free advice and customized services for overseas companies. That includes mainland companies as well. And we are represented in 33 locations all over the world, not yet in North or South Pole, but in 33 other locations. And we're moving towards doing more for putting together investors and brands and, you know, doing more for the capital raising scene as well. So we're currently building our database both for companies looking for investors and investors looking for companies. We have 10 industry teams. So if you're interested in knowing more or getting involved in Invest Hong Kong's activity in the capital raising scene, please do contact us, and we're really happy to chat. So thanks for having me do the opening, Nicole. Give the mic back to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Angelica, and we're just so pleased to be part of this this week's event. It's bringing together so many people on important topics. Now, today's session we have 3 sessions over the course of the afternoon, starting with our roundtable on women founders. Are they a better investment? And what I'd like to do is, just talk about some statistics around why this is so important to understand the performance around funding for women-led businesses. So firstly, according to the Boston Consulting Group, women raise on average in US dollars $935,000 compared to men at $2.1 million. But they also found that startups founded and co-founded by women actually perform better over time, generating 10% higher cumulative revenue over a 5-year period. So that ended up around $660,000 for men and $730,000 for women. According to Fortune magazine, women lead just 14 of Fortune Global 500 companies. That's only 2.8%. The HSBC private banking report showed that 58% of female entrepreneurs are concerned about bias when raising capital. And in the same report, looking just at Europe versus China, women in China raise 40% of their target capital versus in the UK 24% and in France 22%. So, there's some statistic, there's a lot more statistics out there. But what I would, we've shared with you, but what I'd like to do is really go into our roundtable and hear from, 3 fantastic panelists who work in this space, who have different experiences and really going to share their insights with us today. We have Melissa Widner, CEO of Lighter Capital. We have Jeff Ng, partner at Transcend Capital Partners, and Amar Gokhale, who's a director at IntelCap. And what I'd like to do to kick off our session is invite our panelists to introduce themselves before we go into some questions. And Melissa, welcome. And if you could just give us a brief introduction.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks. And hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm actually based in Sydney, but Lighter Capital is a Seattle-based company that recently launched in Australia. So Lighter Capital is the pioneer and leader in revenue-based financing for SaaS companies. So we provide non-dilutive growth to SaaS companies. Usually they're right around the pre-Series A stage. We've been doing this for over a decade and have provided over 800 loans. Prior to taking on the CEO role at Lighter last year, I ran National Australia Bank's venture fund. And I had spent a couple decades in venture capital, both in the US and in Australia. And prior to that, I was an entrepreneur. I had founded a enterprise software company called 7 Software that was sold to Concur Technologies.
Great, thank you very much. I really like the fact you've got this full spectrum of entrepreneur, VC, now debt-based financing and in different countries. So excited to hear what you've got to say. Jeff, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hello everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm representing Transcend Capital Partner, which is a venture capital based in Hong Kong. We invest in companies around like Series A, Series B, as well as P Series A. We have 2 special characteristics of our fund. The first is that we are more like an investment club, which our LP would participate in making the investment decision. And the second interesting point, which I guess why we are invited to attend today, is we commit half of the capital to female entrepreneurs, as well as company which they have senior management who are female with equity stake. And prior to that, I have sub 2 companies. One has gone listed in Hong Kong, and then I've also made about 10 angel investment, and some of them are going list in Nasdaq this year. And yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. And Amar, if you could introduce yourself, thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Nicole, and thanks for having me here, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Amar, and I work at IntelliCap, a development sector consulting company based in India and with operations across South and Southeast Asia and Africa. We are part of the Avishkar Group, which is an impact investor in the region, which means that it invests in social enterprises and seeks a social return on capital in addition to a financial return. We also organize the Sankalp Summits every year. Sankalp is a platform for everybody in the development sector to come together. It's essentially a conference that attracts over 1,000 attendees every year, physical attendees, that is, pre-pandemic, of course. At IntelliCap, we work across various sectors such as financial inclusion, clean energy, sustainable agriculture, water and sanitation, healthcare, livelihoods, and circularity. Gender is essentially a cross-cutting theme across all our work. And it's relevant to mention here that we have done significant research to understand female founders or women entrepreneurs, their specific needs, their challenges, what are some of the policy interventions needed, the ecosystem support needed, and so on. Also, we have striven to understand how gender lens investing, or GLI, really operates, what are the various strategies that investors deploy, and ideate what really can be done to ensure that the concept is mainstreamed in the global south, given that GLI really evolved in the global north, and much of the GLI activity still occurs in the global north. And this research has really led us to appreciate how important it is to tailor financial offerings to suit the needs of female founders or women entrepreneurs, be they debt or equity or something in between, and the importance of non-financial support, of course. So I'll speak more about this, but I'll pause here and I'll hand it back to Nicole.
Yeah, no, thank you, Amar. And I think it's a really good place to start the session today is, you know, you talk about gender lens investing or GLI. I mean, could you share some of your findings and what you've learned at IntelliCap?
Sure. So just continuing from where I left off, I think when it comes to gender lens investing as applied to women entrepreneurs, and I'll come to why I say that in a minute, but when it comes to gender lens investing as applied to women entrepreneurs or female founders, I would really like to highlight three broad things. Firstly, it is really critical to identify or discern sub-segments within women entrepreneurs or female founders and not treat female founders as a homogeneous category. This will really help capital providers and development professionals to identify the appropriate financial vehicles and interventions needed to reach these female founders. For instance, a vast majority of women entrepreneurs are really subsistence entrepreneurs. And what they need is microfinance or small ticket size debt rather than equity. And GLI has to be sensitive to this. So that's one. Secondly, it's important to account for the numerous systemic and social barriers that female founders face. And it's important to design for them. And when I say design for them, I mean it could include alternatives to collateralized lending. It could include designing risk mitigation measures for financial institutions or investors, providing non-financial support to female founders. It could include flexible repayment options, bundling of other services such as insurance, and so on and so forth. So that's number two. Number three, I think it's really important to create an ecosystem that supports female founders. And mind you, I don't just mean an ecosystem that supports women entrepreneurs. And while it's great to have programs or interventions that really mentor women entrepreneurs and female founders, sure, yes, that's really important. However, it's also important to shift the onus of changing processes from the female founders to the financial institutions themselves. Because typically what happens is there are all of these interventions or mentorship programs or incubation programs that work with women entrepreneurs, but what they essentially do is the onus is still on the founder, on the female founder, to come to a point where financial institutions can serve them. But it's also important to shift that onus a little bit and really urge and encourage financial institutions to look inwards and to ensure that there is no unconscious bias, that products and services are suitable and accessible to women as much as they are to men. So it's really important to do that. And the reason I said earlier that GLI as applied to women entrepreneurs or female founders is because we have to recognize that that GLI also includes investing in businesses that might not be owned by women, but are gender forward or have an impact on women by way of employing a whole lot of women. And since the goal here is to achieve SDG 5, that's also a path to doing that. So I think I'll pause here and I'll hand it back to you, Nicole.
There's so many interesting comments there, but I think, the fact that we're not just taking a broad swathe across women, we're actually saying, what are we doing in terms of this subsegment? I like the fact you use the word design. How are we designing and thinking about, part of this festival this week is thinking about a future unlimited, and I know some of these events talk about like co-designing the future, and I think that kind of thinking coming to play. We've talked about the she economy isn't just women, it's about the diversity of everyone being involved. So I think they were really, really relevant to making this a broader discussion in terms of what gender equality is, which is one of our goals here today. So maybe, Melissa, I'd like to bring you into the conversation because, Amar's talked about, designing programs and working with founders and institutions to really connect women, and you've launched Head Over Heels, a network, and I'd like to understand what brought you to create that, and also how important networks and connections are to women.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. I forgot to mention that in my introduction, and it's probably the most relevant piece to why I'm here today. But a little over 10 years ago, I co-founded an organization in Australia called Heads Over Heels, and I'm the current chair. And that's an organization that supports women entrepreneurs running companies with really high growth potential. And the way that we support them is by connecting them to senior business leaders who are willing to open up their networks. And I know there's lots of entrepreneurs on the phone, on the Zoom right now. When I think about the success I had with my company, 7 Software, a lot of it came from maybe a certain person I met at the right time. It was the right strategic partnership or the right introduction to a funder. And we know that these types of networks aren't as prevalent among women as they are among men. So what Heads Over Heels set out to do 10 years ago was to really democratize the networks. So we have our members are both men and women, senior business leaders who are willing to open up these networks to help these very impressive women grow their businesses. Yeah. And I mean, one of the reasons that we started it 10 years ago is by that time I had been in VC for almost a decade. And I had run 2 companies that both had very successful exits. But after being a VC for 10 years, I hardly ever had a woman pitch me. So there was something missing, like women were starting businesses. That wasn't the issue. We know women start as many businesses as men, but they're just not scaling them and they're not getting funding for them. So Heads Over Heels really set out to change that and correct that. And we've made a lot of strides in the last 10 years.
Mm. Yeah, and I think you mentioned pitching and networks and relationships, and HSBC, the private bank, I referenced their one of their reports earlier, but they really talk about the fact that networks are lacking for women, and we're seeing a growth in that, which is great. But when we look at pitching and networks, sometimes it's the terminology we use. Women are looking for mentors, relationships, opportunities to meet investors, and some of the terminology we use as organizations that's systematic. Amar, you talked about the systematic element in the terms of the way organizations work. I think that's why we sometimes don't see women at the forefront of some of these events. And I'm one of the people saying I don't think the word pitching works for women, and that's one of our things here at Next Chapter Raise is to bring that forward and really start sharing that. So thank you for that. Jeff, now you have a different story here because you're a venture capital. You're you and your partners have decided to commit 50% of your funds to deploy that to female founders. I mean, could you share your origin story of how that came about?
Yeah, for Transcend Capital Partner, actually we have 4 general partners, and 2 are female and 2 are male. So it is a very gender diverse venture capital. And when we form the all of the general partners, we have been doing business on our own as well as making different angel investment. So last year, we decided, why not we institutionalize the whole thing and then put together a team and then form our venture capital fund. So we decided to do so. And then when we started, then we try to look for, just like any business, we need to have a segmentation and targeting, right? How we position ourselves. And then we found that it is interestingly that in Hong Kong or even in Asia, there is no fund which other than what we realized that Goldman Sachs is doing something on the diversity, they have put together 1 billion on a GS launch, and then they have a lot of research paper telling how why it has a better return, and then but from the venture capital side, we found that actually no one in Hong Kong is doing that. So we think that it is a good timing and opportunity for us to do so. And I personally think it makes perfect sense, from some economic factors, because if you look into the post-90 or the millennial, actually a lot of females, their education level are higher than men, not unfortunately, but that's just a fact. And their income level are higher. If you go to any professional office, you go to a law firm, you go to an accounting firm, and you go to find a doctor, you will find there are more females than male, and that would put together a phenomenon, both from the consumption side, there will be higher spending power for younger female, and then also from the investment point, because they will have more wealth and for various type of investment. And then it comes to an interesting point that if you are running a company, then you shall be actually find a way to be able to attract the consumer, or to find a way to understand your staff as well as your potential investor, which are on the rising tide. So we think that we are not feminine or anything like that, but we just think it makes perfect economic sense to have a balanced gender on the founding team. So so that's why we commit 50% of the fund for that, because we are just looking at some people would say we are doing for social cause or something. It's nothing like that. We are really looking at the economics, and we think that makes perfect sense.
I really like the fact you mentioned that it's not a social cause, right? It's an economic decision. I mean, interesting. I know we have a lot of founders on today. Many are sole founders. You and I had chatted about this, that 2 of your investments are led by women who were sole founders. Would that be correct?
So far we have made 3 investments. The first one is Prime Care, which is a post-pregnant care center in mainland China, and then the chairman and CEO is a male, but then he has a co-founder which is a female. Yeah, which I think it helps him a lot, because it would be a bit difficult, right, for a male to understand the whole feeling of getting pregnant, delivering a child, and then how to take care a baby after you get birth. So I think it from that perspective, it really helps him to grow the business, and it is going really well. Even during the COVID, last year, its business has grown 3 times in terms of revenue, and it got and then our valuation has risen 6 times with 10-cent investment last month. And another 2, Link is founder Peggy is a female, And then Kasab, like its founder, is also a female. But like as I said, like we are really looking at the fundamental economics rather than, oh, I'm chasing after like it got to be a female founder.
Yeah. And Link obviously founded here in Hong Kong with Peggy Choi, and then caught up with Nikki Ramsey out of Singapore, but has also brought their operations here, and is on our at 3 o'clock is joining us to share her story on our showcase. So we're excited to hear from her. I mean, Amar, we've just heard about the venture capital investment and the approach, particularly that Jeff's taken a data-driven approach, which having a bit more of that element to it. But what other types of funding can women be accessing, particularly for businesses?
Right. So I did mention earlier that there's a need to de-risk financial institutions, and there can be various ways to do this to help them reduce the cost of capital, really. And that's where philanthropic capital or DFI capital has a role to play. And philanthropic capital can essentially be blended with commercial capital to reduce the cost of capital for investors, for financial institutions, in the hope that they will pass on this reduced cost of capital to the female founders or to the women borrowers. And there are various ways in which this can be structured. For instance, philanthropic sources can provide a guarantee cover to loans made by banks, or they can give results-based grants to those concerned, or they could fund technical assistance programs for women, and indeed financial institutions themselves to reorient products and processes to women. Technical assistance and non-financial support actually came out as a very important aspect to help women entrepreneurs. There is a report from IFC which came out, I think, late last year, which looks specifically at the role of technical assistance or non-financial support when combined with capital, of course, to help women entrepreneurs, really meet their business goals and be able to repay their loans. So that's really important, and this is where philanthropic capital or DFI capital can play a role.
Yeah. And you've mentioned the debt-based, and I think bringing that to Melissa, I mean, Melissa, you have worked at NAB in venture capital, and now you're at Lighter Capital, which is the largest revenue-based financing company globally. You're the CEO now there. I mean, do you see any differences or benefits for female founders when you look kind of putting on your VC hat versus what you're now doing at Lighter Capital?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that we still know, and you mentioned this earlier, that such a small percentage of venture funding goes to women-led companies, and that hasn't changed much, sadly, in the 20 years that I've been involved in venture. Yeah. Although I do think we're seeing some meaningful change in Australia, and part of that has to do with our most successful unicorn right now is Canva is run by a young woman, Melanie Perkins. So that's starting to wake people up to the fact that you can make a lot of money investing in women. That's now a $15 billion company. But in looking at how we make decisions for venture investing versus debt investing, it's been pretty interesting to me to look at those two processes. Venture, people say often, is much more an art than a science. And there's a lot of, pattern matching and unconscious bias that goes into it. And most venture capitalists will tell you the most important investing is the team, but that's such a subjective measurement. But when we look at debt financing, we are looking strictly at the financials. So what's interesting is there's such a bigger percentage of funding that Lighter Capital has done to companies with either CEOs, female CEOs, or senior women at the helm. It's about 20% historically, which is just much greater than the average of the average number for the average percentage for venture capital funding. So I think when you take out that bias, it's interesting to see how much more funding goes to women.
Yeah. And our research has shown the more you can drive it back down to data and some of those metrics, you're just seeing a greater results in women coming through that process. It's interesting you raised Canva, Melanie Perkins there, because and you mentioned the fact that only, we've talked about the 3% of funding globally goes to women, but
Maybe she got it all.
Well, yeah, I think so. But it's interesting because of that 3%, a lot of it goes to what are deemed stereotypical businesses, fashion, wellness, where there's an indication that there's more women in that industry. And investors typically invest at an early stage, invest in the founder, and they expect to see, an industry full of the people at the top, right? So you're expecting to see more women in an industry leading those businesses. But Canva falls into that gender neutral bucket, and gender neutral and deep tech are the ones where you're not seeing, it's even slimmer, the funding that goes there. So she's a really great role model coming through.
I
Jeff,
think Melissa has made a good point of some psychological bias, like because a lot of investors would, like, I think it is normal for human beings to reference the past, but then in the field of finance and investment, there is a famous saying, the past doesn't mean the future. So because like, I think a lot of investors will focus, like still by today, like would invest in male, especially like maybe, I'm not sure, but that might be in the US, like Caucasian male, because like, if you look at the unicorns, right, like or those companies which are worth like 10 billions, like on NASDAQ, like a lot of those founders are mainly male, especially Caucasian male. So that's why, like as investor, they will think, oh, if I invest in a Caucasian male, then I would make money, right? That's how it is a psychological bias, but like the world is changing, and like they shall, like as investor or other fellow investor, I think it makes perfect sense that they actually look at some figures, like the education level of the people, the income level of the people, the wealth level of the people in terms of gender. Then they will understand that like the past doesn't tell the future. And if like those figures means the consumption power, like the representation in the workplace, as well as how the wealth are going to allocate into the investment world. So it's the labor market, the consumption market, the capital market. So yeah, but then a lot of psychological bias. I think human beings are more emotional than rational, but if you are rational, you look at the figures, it doesn't make much sense, I think.
Yeah, and that goes to Melissa's point about it's an art, not a science when you're doing the venture capital, right? Like it really is driven by, what do you feel about that founder and their ability to execute, right? Because you're giving them money, can they deliver back? I mean, Jeff, just following on from your comments there, I mean, what is your actual process? Because you've got quite a specific process you take through. I think many of our founders would be interested, and I think some of the investors on here would be interested to hear your specific process with your traffic lights and that you go through to determine how do you move forward with an investment.
Yeah, like in a way, I agree with Melissa that like at the very bottom of it, like it is about human beings. So like we have a pre-screening process to screen the whole thing, but at the end is about the people, is about the judgment and feeling. So we have a pre-screening process that we we receive deal every day, and we also reach out to all the incubator, like all the accelerator, and try to work with them, right? And then after we see some project, and then we receive the proposal. Then because we are a post-revenue venture capital, which we require 8 quarters of revenue track record. So for some deals which we think it doesn't fit us at all, like some may be very good, some might be very bad. Like for the very bad, then it is very bad. But for the very good, for example, our fund doesn't invest in biotech, then like we will screen those. It doesn't mean that the company is not good, just that we are not investing in it, right? And then so we have a traffic light system is like a green, yellow, red. Then we will, like for those we don't want, then we'll put in the red. And then for those like we think are okay, but then not ready for us to invest, we put in yellow. And then for those we find it, it actually satisfies all our basic requirements, then we put in green. And then we will have, like the usual process is we either visit their office or like we do Zoom, for example, for CASUP, like we have never met in person. Actually, we have been doing the whole discussion over Zoom because of the COVID. We can't visit them in Singapore, right? And then after that, like if that's go okay, then we will have, we'll write up our investment memo for our members to, for our investment committee to discuss. And then once like that's okay, then we'll go into due diligence to see if everything's okay. And if everything's okay, then basically we form the, I think this process is useful for those participants who are actually entrepreneurs, I assume. And then we'll write the, draft the contract, and then both sides sign. And then after that, we usually have follow up. Like for example, if the team need talent, or they need some relationship, or they need like follow round investment, we'll work with them on those. Or they just, or otherwise they just want to find us to discuss about like a strategy. Because like all of us have been entrepreneurs, like for example, I have listed my company already and I've been working different founders, then we'll work with them to see like how we can value add it. And yeah, that's basically the whole process. It is nothing mysterious. It is like a clear process, but at the end, I think because we are investing in early stage, still like a PA or Series A or Series B, although it has revenue, but like it is not like a mature company which like private equity can just look at the numbers. It is a lot about the people and the team. So I think at the end, that's what really matters. Yeah.
No, I think it's important to have that transparency. So thank you for showing that, because we may have some people here who just aren't familiar with, okay, what are the steps many VCs will take, and they have different ones, obviously different scenarios, but good to hear that. And I think the other takeaway I would have is that it takes longer than people think to fundraise, because obviously there are steps in that process, and keeping that in mind, that if you're fundraising, start early enough to really factor that into any form of
yeah, I think and it is very different from seed capital or angel investment. For seed capital and angel investment, I have made a lot myself, maybe not a lot, like 10. Like sometimes it is like I do not have such formal process, right? You give me a PowerPoint and then give me a prototype, I think it's okay. Then I just like use a safe contract, or I write a convertible bonds. Like I think I can write a check within 5 days. Yeah.
Yeah, and Nicole, I think that's one of the reasons. Sorry, a lot of people.
No, please. Yeah.
Come to Lighter is we can turn around. We can get funding out in 2 weeks, and it's a pretty simple process. We're taking in the data. We might have, and we're connecting to. We're taking your bank and your banking and your accounting data, and we can get funding out in as little as 2 weeks. So, anyone who's raised venture money, knows this, it could take months, eventually up to a year to do a round. So it's one of the reasons that I think people come to us for debt.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the things at Next Chapter. Part of what we're trying to work towards is encourage women to think about funding all types of options as soon or as early as possible, just to start getting that preparation in place, because it does take longer. I know, Amar, we've talked about this, and the kind of the title for today is "Are Women a Better Investment?" And some of our pre-chat showed some statistics that showed, well, actually there's a real equality there, in terms of, I showed some statistics showing this bit of that 10% cumulative revenue. But I mean, you think the investment case for women is done, right? That they're worth, that everyone should be thinking about them as a really great investment opportunity. I mean, what steps do individuals or organizations need to take to ensure investing in women occurs?
Right. So yeah, I do think that the investment case in women has already been made, and I think we need to move on from that conversation to really look at how can it be put into practice. And there are various ways that it can be done, and there are various interventions required, both on the supply side, so to speak, the cost of capital side, the financial institutions, the investors, and also on the demand side, so to speak. So programs that support women entrepreneurs, that mentor women entrepreneurs, and all of that. And I've referred to this a little earlier, but just speaking on what Jeff said, I think I couldn't agree more. I think people are more emotional than rational, and especially when it comes to equity investing, investors are taking a risk, right? And I once heard an investor say something that was very telling, and it's that people tend to bet on people who look like themselves. So that's why when you have more men as fund managers, unconsciously they will end up investing in more men. So we need that diversity on the funding side as well. So we need more women fund managers. We need more people of color, and this applies not just to equity, but also to debt, really, because we recently did a research where we spoke to a whole lot of banks and tried to understand how they approach lending to women. And the first reaction that we got most often from men was that we don't care about the gender of the borrower, whether it's a man or a woman. We don't care. We just treat them all equally, which is great. And they think that. But when we dig a little deeper, we find that all their frontline staff, people who actually react or interact with these borrowers, they're called DSAs in India, direct sales agents. They are all men. And I'm sure there is some kind of an unconscious bias that is coming in. So to answer your question, what can be done? Firstly, institutions need to look within. They need to really disaggregate their data by sex. First of all, understand where they stand as of now. Are they really lending to women or investing in women in spite thinking that they are following a fair process? Is that really translating into more investment? And if it's not, what's the reason for that? What's the internal reason for that? And what's the external reason for that? And when it comes to the external reason, I mean, ensuring that there is sufficient pipeline of women entrepreneurs, that they receive the kind of support post-investment that will help them, grow their businesses. That's where the ecosystem comes in. And so that's why, we at IntelliCap, we think of ourselves as ecosystem builders. It's not just important to take, one side of the problem, but we have to approach the problem from all sides. So the supply of capital is one, the demand is one, the ecosystem is one. And I think networking is very important. So I think, Melissa, something that you mentioned earlier, Head Over Heels, that platform, which really helps women to network and grow their networks and just be aware of what's out there is really important. So all of these come together to ensure that more capital gets channelized to female founders.
Yeah, Amar, I think you make such a great point, that the importance of measuring. So at NAB Ventures, we started doing this quarterly with our investment committee, and we didn't have a quota in terms of how many companies, female funded companies we were going to fund, but we said we're going to measure what's in our pipeline. And just by measuring it, we started paying attention. When it got to a point where there was nothing in our pipeline run by a woman, it was an impetus for us to make sure and go look for that. And there's a great example of this in Australia. In 2011, 9% of board directorships for the ASX 200, which are the top 200 publicly listed companies in Australia, were held by women, so 9%. So at that time, the country had decided, or the ASIC had decided, they weren't going to put a quota, but they were going to require that all ASX 200 companies report on it. And they actually report, they actually list it in their annual report, the percentage of directors, female directors. And you know what's happened since they've started reporting is now we're close to 30. We might even be at 30%. I think when I checked last time, it was in the high 20s. And the change was just once you have to start reporting on it, you do pay attention to it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things that, I mean, if you are serious about something, you have to measure it, and only then, you know, it really comes to the fore as to how to, you know, achieve those targets, or that intent rather.
Yeah, and Melissa, you bring up a really good point around pipeline, because and the point around this measurement, right? Because there is anecdotes of investors saying, well, I don't meet enough female founders, how can I invest in them? But we've talked about pitch. A lot of women aren't pitching, which is, you know, if you think about where investors source investment, you know, it's pitching, it's warm referrals, some form of research, right? Events like this. So if women aren't kind of pitching, that's a problem, because they're not there. That doesn't mean they're not in the ecosystem, but they're certainly not where the investors expect to see them. The other one is the pipeline. And the warm referral pipeline obviously creates a loop that if women are not getting into that, we're still not seeing that. So I think it's really powerful that you've talked about one action as an organization can take, however that pipeline might be, to actually assess, you know, why aren't women coming into that pipeline if they're lacking.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Are there any other suggestions or ideas that you've seen that have helped either the investment thesis or company culture through kind of the variety of roles you've had?
Well, I think the more it's discussed and the more it's measured, the more we're seeing change. So, you know, I now see something that I never saw even 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. But when I was in venture, when a company will pitch, and this doesn't happen all the time, but they put up their team slide, and if it's all men, so many times, which most of the team slides in these early stage companies are all men, but so many times I've heard the entrepreneur kind of embarrassingly say, yeah, we really need to get, you know, some more diversification. I mean, that would have never even come up 10 years ago. And so we are at least beginning to recognize that, you know, this is important. And we know with data, I mean, this is very objective data, that venture-backed companies that have diversity on the management team perform better than those that don't. So there's that's kind of widely known now and accepted.
Although I would like to add a caveat here. You know, there are also instances of you know, there is just a token woman on the board, or just a token woman in leadership, just to you know, show to investors, or just to make it seem as if companies are diverse, and it helps investors in some way too. I mean, it's difficult as it is to go and find an equity deal that works. So finding an equity deal that has a female founder is even more difficult. So there is this you know, term that has caught on, which is called pink washing. So what it means that investors what they often do is that they look for that token woman on the board, and it's a slippery slope. I mean, there is a risk of investors saying that we have a gender lens. Look, we have this company that has a woman on its board. Well, that's good, but I think we need to look at one step. We need to go one step beyond, and figure out, you know, are there women employees? Are there women employees at various levels? And is there real diversity within the company, and not just token diversity?
I want to say that education is very important. Like education, the investor got to be educated. The entrepreneur, for students, they got to be educated, and for the entrepreneurs, they got to be educated. The company got to be educated. But what's this education about? Like, I think there are 2 points I really want to share. The first is that it doesn't make sense for a female, not as good as male, in forming a strategy, in building a team, or in like how to design a product, or how to market it, how to sell it. It doesn't make sense. Like if you go to school, like nowadays, like I don't know how in other countries, but in Hong Kong, like in a secondary school, there are all the female leaders in the school, right? Why is that? Like after they graduate, they can't be leaders. So the female entrepreneurs, they got to be very clear on that point, right? Because why things are not happening, I think it is on both sides, both the investor as well as the entrepreneurs themselves. If like those participants today, you join later session and listen to Peggy or listen to Nikki, you will know like they are just whoa, powerful, wonderful, right? On the second point I want to raise is that sometimes like some female entrepreneurs, like they will try to be men, right? You know, because like they think, oh, they are just equally as good as the male, or they even want to be like making it a bit stretching and say, oh, I'm actually female, so I'm better than male. But I don't think like you need to compare like whether male is better or female is better. So just focus on the work itself, right? But on the second point is female is inborn like some characteristics which male doesn't have. Otherwise, like as human being, we won't have male and female. And so I think since you're born to be a female, then I think shall appreciate like some like characteristics or some strength which you have to bring to the table. So I think these 2 points are a lot of people are not aware of it, and which makes the investment world or the entrepreneur not like really connecting. And once these are connect, I guess like a lot of productivity or good things will happen, which is better for all the consumer and investor.
And I think you hit on a really good point around diversity, right? I mean, everyone is an individual and we all bring different things regardless of gender, background, many factors, right? So it's around what does an individual bring to the table. I mean, there's a question in the chat around diversity, so I think it's a really good segue into that, is, you know, what happens if on the flip side, so thank you, Eka, I can see you there. So in terms of, if it's an all-female team, you know, coming up, so we've talked about often the pitches either male heavy. What happens if there's an all-female team? Does that ever work against them, given there's more of a trend now for diversity? I'm gonna go.
I think, yeah, I would say yes, especially if it's a, you know, if it's a later stage company and we're talking about a senior management team of 6 or 8 people and it's all women. When you're at the, you know, you would say, I would look for diversity on both sides. But when it's just a couple, 2 founders or 2 or 3 people, you know, it's hard to get that diversity either way because it's just such a small number. But as you grow, you know, being conscious, if you're 2 female founders and your first senior hire is a female, you might want to really make sure that the next one is a male, even if it takes you longer to find one who's just good.
So we've only got a few minutes left. I'd like to final out and just ask each of you, I mean, is there one really great success story? I think, Melissa, you've already mentioned Canva, but, and, you know, Amar, Jeff, and Melissa, actually probably another one. Is any success stories you've seen? It doesn't even have to be female founder. It could be an organization that's done something fantastic, or just something that shows us where are we seeing change happening and showing that, you know, women are a good investment and people are following through on that messaging.
I would just go to the headsoverheels.com.au site and look at we have such an impressive portfolio. Those are all women-led companies. So there's so many great examples.
Great.
Right. So if I may come in here, I think I'll refer to Sankalp, which is the conference that I mentioned earlier. So every year at Sankalp we have this deal room, where we invite investors and we invite entrepreneurs who are looking to raise capital, and we kind of do a matchmaking. And over the years, we realized that we were getting very few women entrepreneurs to these deal rooms. So what we did is we said that let's try to do a female founders deal room, only specific to women. And we were surprised to see that, you know, we got almost 100 applications at the Sankalp Global Summit last year, and these ranged from a capital need of from like $100,000 to $5 million across grant, equity, debt. So it really shows that how the messaging is also equally important. The messaging also needs to be sensitive to women and be able to draw more women to apply. So that's something that I would say is a success story. And we intend to have this female founders deal room moving forward at every one of our Sankalps, and hopefully make the connections that will result in fundraisers.
It's a really interesting point you make there around that messaging, because we've already talked around that, around the pitching. If, you know, what other terminology can we be thinking about that encourages more women to engage, and even the style of it, and that links back into the systematic points you raised, you know, networking versus mentoring versus relationship building. I mean, women are looking to build relationships with investors. You know, I think a big takeaway there would be building that over time and not waiting till you need the money, because actually you want to be engaging with the right people and spending time researching that. I mean, Jeff, you know, any other stories that you'd like to share in terms of some of the successes you've seen supporting women?
Well, both, like I have set 2 companies, and then both have female co-founders. And then when I look around the office, like we have quite equal gender. Like for example, for Google Online is a digital marketing companies. I think we have both male and female like colleagues in our 200 staff workforce. And sometimes like I want to like highlight a point like which I mentioned, like the 2 points of education. For example, the second point, why some things like a female are better. Like for example, like we are a marketing company, and some of our clients are beauty clients. For example, like a lipstick or like a mascara. Like it would be quite hard for our male colleague to have a detailed understanding of those, right? So in this particular case, then like the female colleague would perform better. Like I think there's like we are not like trying to have the equal gender balance for the sake of it. Like I think we shall really look at like how things work like fundamentally and economically. Like if someone does this is better, then like I will assign that person to do the work. And I think like for example, like today's like discussion is a good sign for the society to actually to have like a different perspective and different discussion about this gender diverse, or like how women can perform better in the fundraising or in the business world. I think like today's discussion is a manifestation of itself that like as a society, investment society or business society, we are like having better awareness on this issue.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Well, I want to thank you. I think one of the things we're quite proud of out of the panel today is that we've really brought together a diverse group of people. You know, we're really proud that, you know, in addition to Melissa, but certainly having 2 men in this discussion, we often talk about how important it is that it's not, you know, just women talking about what is obviously a broader societal discussion and debate. And you're going back to some of those statistics I talked about earlier. When you look at some of the reports coming out, one of them from Boston Consulting Group talks about if we can just have greater investment in women. I think they were talking about having, you know, a boost of $5 trillion into the world GDP. I mean, the numbers are just staggering. The differences that can be made in terms of bringing in that diversity, and certainly bringing in discussions like today are really powerful around that. So I want to thank you all for your time. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Amar. Thank you, Jeff, for your time today.